My grandparents, my aunt and uncle were all part of the greatest generation. There's a lot of lessons that I learned from them and that we as a society can learn from them. These are people who went through incredibly difficult times in America. They went through war, they went through disease, they went through all sorts of civil strife and racial divide and everything under the sun. They weren't perfect people by any stretch of the imagination. I want to make that very clear. They had their vices, they had their sins, same as anybody else. But what I hate is, in the modern day, specifically from the left wing, you see people doing nothing but demonize that generation, demonizing everything that came before them, instead of learning from them, taking the good, taking the bad, and learning important lessons from them. They would rather just demonize them and act like they're better. I hate it when a generation comes along and acts better than the one that was before it. That's something I don't respect as a fan of history. Because history is dirty, history is complicated. There's good and there's bad as there's always been. Unless you were alive for the time, you can't say for certain what decisions you would make. The greatest generation, for the most part, learned from their mistakes. They absolutely did. Even my parents have said, they were way different than when we were growing up, when they were older. As far as things like racial issues, they were way different later on. They were way more accepting. They learned. And we need to learn from them. At the end of the day, they sacrificed a lot for their families. A lot of them did. A lot of them went to war and never came back. They sacrificed everything as teenagers for their country. And I don't care what your views are on the Second World War. They made that sacrifice willingly. Would you be willing to do that? Have to ask yourself that question. I can't answer it for you. But they did many great things. There's a reason they got the name Greatest Generation, because there's a lot to take from them. A lot of positive things. And instead, we're seeing younger and younger generations just abandon the core things that they tried to teach. The good things that they tried to teach. Now, I'm 31. I was born in 92, so technically I'm a millennial. And my generation hasn't exactly been the greatest either. We were largely raised by the boomers. And their generation wasn't the greatest either. There were some of them that took the lessons of their parents to heart, and they turned out good. There were others who went off and did whatever they wanted to, and they made a mess of their lives that they passed on to their kids, and their kids are passing on to their kids, and so on and so forth. No generation is perfect. But there are people within generations that stand out, and when you've got a larger number of people that stand out, you need to be taking lessons from them, and I think that's true of the greatest generation. I absolutely think that's true of them. And as I remember my grandma, my grandpa, my aunt, my uncle, these people who all had an impact on my life, I try to take not even what they said, but what they did to heart. When I used to visit my aunt, she was one of a kind, I tell you what. She opened her home to us. She made sure that all of our needs were met. If you wanted a treat to eat, she would go and bake you one. If you wanted lunch, she would make you whatever was in her fridge. She wanted to make sure you were taken care of above herself, above her own needs. And she lived like that till she died of cancer. May she rest in peace. She was, I believe, in her 80s when she passed finally. But she was an amazing woman. She took care of her husband. She took care of her kids, grandkids, great-grandkids. She was absolutely fantastic. And she had a level of generosity I rarely see from any other generation. And it was inspiring. But she wasn't alone. I grew up with several people like that. My uncle, who she was married to, he was a bit rough around the edges. But boy, did he love family. He loved kids. He lit up around kids. Loved dogs. He was a hard-working man. He was very handy. Bit of a gruff exterior, but he was special. They made an interesting pair, that's for sure, but they stuck together till death did them part. That's another thing you rarely see anymore now, is people sticking together till death do them part. They took those vows seriously. That's a lesson that we can learn from a lot of them. Not saying all of them stayed together, but a lot of them did. We need to take those lessons and we need to apply them in order to make a better future for ourselves and for the next generations. The next generations need everything they can get because this world is out to chew them up and spit them out. It's already doing that. The education is worse than it's ever been, and they're not being educated with any sort of common sense. They're just doing stupid things to endanger themselves and others. And now I know what you're probably going to say. Each generation complains about the next, and nothing's new there. Okay, fair enough. But when there's actual problems with a generation, I think that warrants addressing. Don't you? I think there's a lot of problems with the Gen Z generation. There's a lot of surprises. Like when I heard that a lot of the Gen Z kids are switching over to flip phones because they're too overstimulated by smartphones. They want something simple. I say good for them. Moves like that I absolutely appreciate. Trying to get away from all of the chaos of the modern technological hellscape. Good for them. They recognize there's something wrong with being buried in your phone 24/7 as most of us frequently are. Some of them were smart enough to recognize that without even being prompted. That's the sign of a smart generation, or at least part of a smart generation. Willing to actually solve the problems and not believing the lies that they're being told by others. There are some standouts in Gen Z. I don't want to totally excoriate them. But they also have to contend with the members of their generation who just want to take free rides. They don't have any respect for themselves. They don't have any respect for others, for their workplace, for money. They just live wild and crazy, vice to vice to vice. And they do damage to their societies. The societies that their great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents built for them. And that have been maintained through the generations. They don't want to maintain them. They'd rather tear them down. It's sad. There's not a lot of respect for history. People would rather tear down history, tear down statues because they believe something that is controversial today. So what? That's history. Different generations believe different things. Doesn't make what they believed in the past excusable, but you don't destroy the past. You acknowledge it. You try to understand it. Instead of just simply passing judgment. This is supposed to be the no judgment generation. What the heck happened? All they ever do is judge people who came before them. And who are they to do that? They've barely been alive. But they've been so inundated by university professors and school teachers and Tumblr and Twitter and all that garbage to hate America, to hate past generations, to hate themselves. They don't know what love looks like. A few of them do because their parents went out of their way to actually teach and demonstrate it to them, like my parents did with me. But those are very few, and it's becoming fewer by the day, and it's very discouraging to people. One thing we can learn from the greatest generation is sacrifice. When it came to World War II, there were so many kids willing to put their lives on the line. And we're talking kids who are 16, 17, 18, barely getting going in life, but they wanted to take up a rifle and defend their country. Whether you agree with the premise of the war or not is irrelevant. They were willing to do that. They were willing to fight to protect what mattered to them. They saw some horrible things. Many of them, again, didn't return. One of the worst wars in human history, and it was fought by some of the youngest. It was awful. And we're all praying that we never reach that point again, but the way the world is going, nobody really knows. We know there's going to be more wars. We're already seeing conflicts, but nobody wants a third world war because it's not going to be like the second. The second was already terrible. The next is going to be even worse. But learn how they dealt with that. Many of them had trauma. They had PTSD because they saw their friends getting blown up next to them. The guys who stormed Iwo Jima. Seeing guys get ripped apart by machine guns. Seeing landing craft absolutely obliterated. Same on D-Day. But they were fortunate enough to survive. They had survivor's guilt, and they lived with it until they were old and shaky. Most likely shaky because of all of the shell shock and everything else. Awful. And yet little punks come along and think that they can just judge those people. Oh, it makes me so angry, dude. Makes me very angry. Learned so much over the years about the Second World War and what was sacrificed. Stories from my grandfather from his time. And I mean, granted, he didn't have as traumatic of an experience, but he saw some stuff that messed with him. He really did. I think he was one of the fortunate ones because not only did he come back alive along with his brother, but he didn't see a lot of the worst of it. I remember they went around Hiroshima and Nagasaki when they were bombed. I forget which one it was, but he said you saw one side of the mountain was green, the other side was black. Can you imagine? That was the first time a weapon that destructive. That had an impact on him seeing that. That must have been horrific knowing there was something that powerful that could do that much damage. Because they had seen powerful weapons that tore people apart. They had never seen nothing like that. That was a whole new level of warfare unfolding right in front of their very eyes. It's just, there's so much that can be learned from them. And again, they made mistakes too. They did. But they tended to learn from their mistakes and then pass on those lessons. And that's exactly not only what we need to do with our generation of kids, but we need to be learning from them in order to equip our kids better. We need to be working hard. We need to be building things. We need to be putting our country first instead of going for this globalist, socialist nonsense. We need to be taking care of each other as opposed to trying to take care of the world. That's not a responsibility. Each culture is responsible for itself. We don't need to be this global community that everybody wants. We've already got a global community of trade and all these other things. We don't need to be so interlinked that there's no culture anywhere anymore. It's ridiculous. That's not what previous generations fought for. People want to come here, they want to assimilate, fine. But we're not going to be every single country to every single person. That's not, we are America. We can learn how to be Americans from them, from the good that they did, and we can reject the bad. I just get so sad when that generation is so disrespected, they're not even around to defend themselves. And I miss them, guys. I really do. I miss their stories. I miss the way that they took care of their kids and us. And some of them didn't. Again, I could get into all the controversial aspects because they're still humans. But I'm not here to do that. I'm here to say thank you to them. To say that we're doing our best. Some of us are doing our best to carry on your lessons. We appreciate your hardships, your sacrifices. God bless you. May you rest in peace. May many of you have known the Lord and gone to be with Him. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Super Koopa TV. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.